A virgin rancher gave his only blanket to 2 Apache sisters. At dawn, 300 warriors arrived. The winter wind blew harsh and cold across the empty plains of New Mexico, carrying with it a sharp, icy bite that seemed to cut straight through clothing. The sun had long disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the landscape shrouded in shadows. Snow lay thick on the ground, making the world seem silent except for the occasional crunch of frozen earth beneath the hooves of Samuel's horses. Samuel, a young rancher in his early 20s, wrapped his thin coat tightly around himself and trudged toward the barn, hoping to finish feeding the animals before the temperature dropped any further. He had lived on this land for several years, a life shaped by solitude, hard work, and a quiet rhythm that only the frontier could demand. Samuel's father had died when he was young, leaving him the ranch, a few cattle, and the skills needed to survive in a land that was beautiful but unforgiving. Life was not easy, but he had learned to find comfort in the small routines, stacking firewood, checking fences for breaks, and making sure his animals were fed and warm. There was little excitement, and yet Samuel had grown content in his quiet, solitary existence. As he moved near the edge of the property, a sudden movement caught his eye. At first he thought it was the wind playing tricks on the snow-covered grass, but then he saw them clearly, 2 figures huddled together, shivering near the tree line. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. They were children, or at least very young girls, no older than 16, their thin clothes doing little to shield them from the biting cold. Their small hands were pressed tightly to their bodies, as if trying to pull themselves together against the wind. He could see the way their teeth chattered, how their eyes, wide with fear, darted toward the dark horizon as if expecting something, or someone, terrible to appear. Without thinking twice, Samuel approached them slowly, keeping his voice low and calm so as not to startle them further. "Hey there," he called softly, "come closer. You'll freeze out here." The girls froze, eyes widening even more, and for a moment Samuel feared they would run or vanish into the shadows. But then one of them stepped forward hesitantly, her bare fingers reaching out, and the other followed. Samuel noticed how fragile they looked, their faces pale from cold and hunger. He knew immediately that they had been wandering in the snow for hours, maybe even longer. He glanced down at the bundle strapped across his back, a single, worn blanket, the only one he owned. Normally, he would have used it for himself, keeping warm on the long, lonely nights in the small cabin he called home. But now, seeing the girls suffering, he didn't hesitate. Carefully, he knelt in the snow and pulled the blanket around the trembling pair, letting them share it. The sisters huddled close together, and for the first time in hours, their chattering began to slow. Samuel could feel the heat from their small bodies pressing against him, and even though he was cold himself, a strange warmth filled his chest. "You'll be all right now," he said gently, trying to hide the nervousness in his own voice. "Just stay close and don't move too fast." The girls nodded silently, their eyes wide, filled with a mix of gratitude and confusion. Samuel could see their dark hair sticking to their faces from the frost, and he realized just how desperate their situation must have been. He wanted to ask where they came from, but words seemed unnecessary. At this moment, survival was more important than stories or explanations. He led them slowly back toward the cabin, the snow crunching under his boots. Along the way, he kept an eye on the distant horizon, half expecting someone to appear from the darkness. His thoughts raced. Who were these girls? Were they alone? Did anyone else know they were out here? The frontier was not a safe place, and Samuel had heard stories of conflicts between settlers and the native tribes that lived nearby. He knew that being kind could be risky, but his heart would not allow him to leave them out in the freezing night. When they reached the cabin, Samuel lit the small hearth, the fire roaring to life with a sudden comforting heat. The girls sat down on the floor, wrapped in the blanket, their faces slowly relaxing as warmth spread through their frozen bodies. Samuel handed them a small piece of bread he had kept from supper, and they ate it quietly, their small hands trembling around the food. He watched them closely, trying to understand who they were, but still, they did not speak much. There was a dignity in their silence, a quiet strength that reminded him that these were not ordinary children. Samuel went outside briefly to check the animals, making sure the horses and cattle were safe in their pens. When he returned, he found the girls sitting by the fire, staring into the flames as if trying to find answers in the dancing shadows. He sat down across from them, unsure of what to say next. After a long pause, one of the girls finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you," she said. You saved us." Samuel nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. "It was nothing," he said. "Just get warm, that's the important thing." As the night wore on, Samuel offered them what little comfort he could provide. More food, a place near the fire, and blankets to keep them from freezing. The girls remained quiet, speaking only when necessary, their eyes occasionally meeting his with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Samuel respected their silence, sensing that they had been through hardships he could hardly imagine. He did not press them for details. The night was long, and he knew that trust could not be forced. It had to be earned. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the wooden shutters of the cabin. Samuel lay awake for hours, listening to the sound, worrying about the dangers the night might bring. He thought about the stories he had heard from neighbors, of raids, of travelers lost in the snow, of families torn apart by violence, and he realized just how fragile life on the frontier could be. Yet, despite the fear, he felt a strange sense of hope. For the first time in many years, he had felt needed, and the warmth of the girls' presence brought a new kind of purpose to his lonely existence. By midnight, the girls had finally drifted into a quiet sleep, their small bodies curled together beneath the blanket. Samuel stayed awake a little longer, staring into the fire, thinking about what the morning might bring. He knew that once the sun rose, the reality of the world outside would return, and with it, challenges he could not yet foresee. But for now, in the stillness of the snow-covered night, there was peace. There was safety. There was a simple act of kindness, shared between a lonely rancher and two lost sisters, that for a few precious hours made the cold world feel a little warmer. As Samuel finally lay down on his own bedroll, still wrapped in the shadows of the cabin, he could not help but wonder about the girls' journey. Who were they running from? What had brought them so far from home? He did not know the answers, and perhaps he never would. But he knew one thing for certain. No matter what the dawn might bring, he had done the right thing. He had shared what little he had with those in need, and that act, simple as it was, carried a power he could feel deep in his heart. Outside, the wind continued to sweep across the prairie, and the stars blinked cold and distant above the snowy landscape. Yet inside that small cabin, warmth lingered, not just from the fire, but from the quiet courage and compassion that had brought together a young rancher and two lost sisters on a night when the world seemed frozen and unforgiving. And as Samuel drifted into a restless sleep, he did not yet know that this single night of kindness would set in motion events that would change his life forever, bringing him face to face with challenges, danger, and choices that would test the very heart of his humanity. For now, though, there was only the snow, the fire, and the fragile sense of hope that comes when one dares to care for another, even in a world as harsh and untamed as the frontier. The night had been long, and when dawn finally arrived, the ranch seemed almost peaceful. The first rays of sunlight stretched lazily across the snow-covered prairie, turning it into a pale gold and pink wonderland. Samuel awoke slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes and listening to the soft crackle of the dying fire. The two sisters still slept huddled together under the blanket he had given them, their breaths quiet and even. For a moment, Samuel allowed himself a sigh of relief. They had survived the night. That was more than he could have hoped for when he first found them shivering at the edge of his land. Despite the calm appearance, Samuel knew the world beyond his cabin was never truly safe. The frontier held dangers at every turn, the cold, the animals, and sometimes the people. Rumors and stories had always reached him, tales of conflicts between settlers and native tribes, of travelers being lost in storms, or worse, of travelers being attacked. Samuel had never seen such danger directly, but he had heard enough to know that a simple act of kindness could be misunderstood. And yet, he had acted anyway, letting his heart guide him instead of fear. While the girls slept, Samuel stepped outside, the cold air hitting him like a wall. He could see the snow sparkling under the sun, smooth and untouched except for his own footprints from the night before. He scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing as he tried to look for any sign of movement. So far, there was none. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching. Samuel had spent enough years on this land to know that the silence of the prairie could be deceptive. Something as small as a falling branch or a distant hoofbeat could signal danger. Inside the cabin, the girls stirred, slowly waking from their sleep. They blinked against the morning light and looked around, realizing where they were. Their eyes met Samuel's, and for a moment no words were spoken. There was an unspoken understanding between them. He had helped them, and they were safe, at least for now. The older sister, who appeared to be about 15, rubbed her arms, still feeling the chill from the night. The younger one, perhaps 13, stayed close to her sister, shivering lightly under the thin blanket. "Good morning," Samuel said gently, his voice soft so as not to startle them. "You slept well," the older sister nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small but firm. "You saved our lives last night." Samuel shook his head. "It's nothing, you were freezing." "Anyone would have done the same." She hesitated, then gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Samuel could tell there was more to their story than what they had shared. Breakfast was simple. Samuel gave them warm porridge he had prepared, letting the steam fill the cabin with a comforting aroma. The girls ate quietly, still cautious, still unsure. Samuel watched them closely, noting the way their hands shook as they held the bowls. Hunger, he realized, was only part of their suffering. Exhaustion and fear weighed on them as well. He tried to make conversation, asking simple questions about where they had come from, if they had family nearby, but the answers were vague. It was clear they were hiding something, or perhaps they didn't trust him enough yet to tell the truth. Outside, the wind continued to whistle across the plains, though not as violently as during the night. Samuel finished tending to his animals, checking that the cattle and horses were unharmed and that the fences were secure. He thought about the journey these girls must have taken, wandering through the snow, alone and frightened. It was a dangerous world, and he wondered why they had been out in it at all. What had forced them to leave their home? What kind of danger had they been escaping? As the morning passed, Samuel noticed a change in the girls. Their initial fear began to ease, replaced by cautious curiosity. They started to look around the cabin, taking in its small, simple furnishings, the rough wooden table, the beds made from straw, the small fire in the hearth. Samuel could see them imagining what life might be like here, a strange world for them compared to whatever they had known before. He felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. Pride that he could offer them safety, and anxiety over the unknown dangers that might still be approaching. By midday, Samuel decided to take them outside to stretch their legs. The snow glistened in the sunlight, and the cold, while sharp, was less biting than during the night. He led them to the small creek that ran along the edge of his property, a thin line of water cutting through the snow. The girls stared at it in wonder, perhaps never having seen flowing water in winter. Samuel knelt beside the creek and showed them how to gather water safely, how to break the ice without falling in. The older sister watched carefully, mimicking his movements, while the younger one giggled softly when the ice made a sharp cracking sound. For a brief moment, laughter filled the cold air, a sound so rare in the harshness of the frontier that it seemed almost magical. Samuel smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. These small moments, the quiet trust being built, were precious and fragile. He knew that they could not last forever, that life outside these few acres of land could be dangerous and unpredictable. Still, he allowed himself to enjoy the fleeting peace, watching the girls' faces light up with curiosity and relief. As the afternoon approached, Samuel's thoughts returned to caution. He had heard the stories of misunderstandings, stories of generosity met with suspicion. The frontier was a place of mistrust, where kindness could be interpreted as weakness or invitation for harm. Samuel knew he must be careful, yet he could not deny the humanity in front of him. The girls were innocent, lost, and in need. How could he turn them away when he had the means, however small, to help? Around mid-afternoon, there was a distant sound, faint but distinct. A drum beat? No, not a drum. It was the sound of hooves against frozen earth, faint and irregular, as if a small group was approaching. Samuel froze, listening carefully. His heart beat faster. The prairie was vast, and movement could come from anywhere. He signaled for the girls to stay inside the cabin and not make a sound. They nodded, sensing the tension in his posture and voice. Samuel's hand hovered near the door, ready to react, though he had no weapon other than a small hunting knife at his belt. Minutes stretched into long, agonizing moments. The sound of hooves grew slightly, then faded again. Samuel peered through the small window, trying to discern whether the approaching figures were friend or foe. He remembered the stories he had heard from neighbors about settlers encountering wandering groups of Apache warriors or scouts. Sometimes they came with anger, sometimes with warning. He had no way to know which this was, and that uncertainty made his chest tighten with anxiety. Inside the cabin, the girls huddled together, watching Samuel carefully. They had grown more comfortable in his presence, yet the tension in the room reminded them that safety was never guaranteed. They whispered to each other in low voices, words Samuel could not understand, but the fear in their eyes was clear. Samuel wanted to reassure them, to tell them that everything would be fine, but he knew better. On the frontier, danger was always possible, and being unprepared could have devastating consequences. Hours passed slowly. Samuel kept the fire going, checked the animals, and watched the horizon. The girls began to tell him small details about their journey, enough to show that they had been alone for days, relying on the kindness of strangers and their own wits. They spoke of hunger, of freezing nights, and of the fear of being caught by people who might not understand them. Samuel listened quietly, offering words of comfort where he could, though he knew that no words could undo the hardships they had faced. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of pink and orange, Samuel realized that he had grown deeply attached to these girls. Their presence had brought warmth and purpose to his lonely life. Yet he also knew that attachment came with responsibility. He could not let his guard down. Whoever was approaching across the plains might not understand kindness, and the girls' lives could still be in danger. Samuel resolved to remain vigilant, prepared for whatever might come, while continuing to care for those in front of him. That evening, Samuel prepared a larger meal, giving the girls food and warmth before the cold of night returned. They sat together quietly, sharing what little conversation they could. There was laughter, small but genuine, and moments of shared humanity that made the cabin feel like a small oasis against the harsh wilderness outside. Samuel realized that these moments, simple as they were a gift. In the vast, lonely expanse of the frontier, human connection was rare and precious. And yet, beneath the warmth of the fire and the comfort of food, Samuel's mind never stopped thinking of the unknown. The sound of approaching travelers, the faint rumors of conflicts, and the knowledge that danger could arrive at any moment kept him alert. He understood that this fragile peace could be shattered in an instant, and he had to be ready to protect the girls at all costs. As the night descended, Samuel and the sisters settled near the fire. Snow fell softly outside, a quiet reminder of the cold and danger beyond the cabin walls. The girls, now more comfortable, leaned against Samuel as he watched the flames. He felt a deep sense of connection, a bond formed not through words, but through shared hardship, trust, and the simple act of caring for another human being. For Samuel, this night would remain in his memory forever, a moment of humanity shining brightly against the unforgiving frontier. The first light of dawn painted the horizon in soft shades of pink and gold, but for Samuel there was little comfort in the beauty. The night had been long and restless, and sleep had done little to ease the tension coiling in his chest. Every sound carried weight, the creak of a wooden shutter, the faint rustle of the wind through the trees, even the soft steps of the girls as they moved to stir the fire. Samuel had grown protective of them over the past day. What had started as a simple act of kindness, giving his only blanket to two frightened sisters, had transformed into a responsibility that now weighed heavily on him. As the girls prepared a small breakfast by the fire, Samuel's eyes kept darting toward the horizon. His instincts, honed from years alone on the frontier, told him that something was approaching. The prairie, vast and empty, had a way of making sounds carry for miles, and he thought he heard a faint rhythm, a soft, distant drumming, steady and purposeful. At first, he questioned himself. Perhaps it was only the wind against the frozen grass. But then it came again, unmistakable, the thrum of many hooves against the frozen earth moving in unison. Samuel's heart began to race. He knew the stories, the tales of scouts and warriors riding across the plains. His mind spun with possibilities. Were they scouts? Were they coming with anger? And most importantly, were they connected to the girls? Samuel did not know, and the uncertainty gnawed at him like the cold. He motioned for the girls to stay close, whispering for them to keep calm and to not make a sound. They obeyed without question, their eyes wide with fear, yet a quiet trust in Samuel evident in the way they stayed huddled near him. The drumming grew louder, echoing across the frozen fields. From the ridge beyond the creek, a movement began to take shape. Samuel squinted, trying to discern shapes in the early light. At first they were small and distant, but slowly he could make out figures, riders mounted on horses, moving steadily in formation. His heart nearly stopped when he estimated their numbers. There were hundreds, their dark silhouettes stretching across the ridge, a living wave of motion against the pastel sunrise. Samuel counted silently in disbelief. At least 300. 300 warriors were approaching his small, isolated cabin. Fear surged through him, but there was no time to panic. He backed away from the window and gathered the girls, holding them close. "Stay here," he whispered. "Do exactly as I say. Don't move, don't speak, and stay close to me." The girls nodded silently, gripping each other, their small bodies trembling, whether from cold, fear, or both. Samuel could not tell. He scanned the cabin for anything that could be used for defense, but there was little. A hunting knife at his belt, a few pots and pans, but beyond that he had nothing against hundreds of riders. As the warriors approached closer, their movements became clearer. Samuel could see that they were young and old, men and some older women, all mounted and alert. Their horses, strong and trained, trotted in perfect rhythm. The warriors carried bows, spears, and shields. They rode with purpose, and there was an intensity in their posture that spoke of a culture deeply connected to both honor and family. Samuel's mind raced. He had no way of knowing their intentions. Were they here to punish, to demand tribute? Or, he dared not hope, were they coming to protect the girls? The older sister, sensing the tension, whispered to Samuel in a low voice he barely understood. They know." Her words, soft and trembling, sent another chill down his spine. "Know what?" Samuel whispered back, his voice barely audible. She pointed toward the riders, her eyes wide with fear and recognition. Samuel followed her gaze, realizing that she was not mistaken. The warriors were not strangers, they were her people. And the thousands of possibilities that raced through Samuel's mind now narrowed into a single, terrifying thought. This was not a random raid. This was personal. Samuel knew that the frontier was a world of complex relationships, where every action carried consequences. His decision to help these girls, an act of pure kindness, had now been witnessed, interpreted, and carried back to the people who mattered most to them. And now that judgment would arrive with the force of hundreds of riders, the weight of a community's honor and pride. Samuel's stomach churned. He had acted with courage and compassion, yet he could not ignore the reality. Misunderstandings could be deadly. As the riders drew closer, Samuel noticed how the girls' expressions shifted. The older sister's fear remained, but there was also a quiet confidence in her eyes, a subtle expectation that Samuel might somehow survive what was coming. The younger one clutched her sister tightly, her head buried in her shoulder. Samuel felt a deep pang of responsibility. If anything happened here, it would be on him. His mind raced for a solution, for a way to communicate his intentions, his innocence, before violence could erupt. The warriors finally reached the edge of Samuel's property, their horses stamping the frozen earth, sending small sprays of snow into the air. Samuel stepped outside slowly, hands raised to show he carried nothing but the truth in his heart. The wind carried the sound of hooves, and for a moment there was only silence, punctuated by the low hiss of breath from the horses and the occasional flap of a cloak against the cold. Samuel's pulse throbbed in his ears. Then one of the riders, the eldest-looking man, dismounted and approached. His face was stern, weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes held intelligence and awareness. Samuel swallowed hard, struggling to find words that could convey the innocence of his actions. I helped your daughters," he said, his voice firm despite the fear twisting in his stomach. "They were freezing. I had a blanket. I could not leave them outside. I mean no harm." For a tense moment, there was no response. The warrior studied him, looking at Samuel's thin coat, his unarmed hands, and then at the girls huddled behind him. Slowly, the warrior nodded toward the sisters, and they stepped forward, each wrapped in the single blanket Samuel had offered. The older sister spoke, her voice trembling yet clear. "He saved us," she said. "He gave us his only blanket when we had nothing. He meant no harm. He only wanted to help." The elder warrior's eyes softened slightly, though the tension in the air remained. He turned to the other riders, speaking in a low voice, and Samuel realized that every man and woman in the group was listening. There was a murmur, a ripple of conversation carried on the wind, and then, slowly, the formation began to shift. Weapons were lowered, but the riders remained alert, cautious. Samuel felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, through the honesty and courage of the girls, he might survive this encounter. The older warrior dismounted fully now, stepping closer to Samuel. "Your heart is good," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You acted with courage. You saved them from the cold when many would have ignored them. That cannot be forgotten." Samuel swallowed, relief washing over him, though he remained wary. He knew the frontier did not forgive mistakes easily. I only did what I thought was right," he replied. "I could not leave them out in the snow." The elder warrior nodded again, then turned to the other riders. One by one, they dismounted, moving closer to Samuel's cabin. Some carried gifts, bundles of blankets, dried meat, and small items of food. Samuel watched, astonished. The vast group that had arrived as a potential threat was now offering kindness, their actions guided by the trust of their daughter's words. He realized that what he had feared most, the wrath of hundreds, had been replaced by respect and gratitude. As the morning progressed, Samuel and the sisters shared food and stories with the warriors, sitting around the fire and listening to tales of the plains, of survival, and of family. The girls spoke quietly, explaining their journey and the dangers they had faced. Samuel's presence became less of an unknown, more of a symbol of trust between worlds that so often misunderstood each other. He marveled at the humanity in front of him. Hundreds of people, warriors and elders alike, who had come prepared for confrontation but had chosen peace when they understood the truth. By midday, the tension had fully eased. The warriors helped repair the fences, fed the cattle, and offered guidance to Samuel, showing him better ways to protect his land and livestock during the harsh winter. Samuel learned quickly, absorbing their advice with gratitude. The girls, once frightened and silent, now laughed quietly, helping where they could, their bond with Samuel growing stronger with every shared moment. For Samuel, the morning became a turning point in his life. A simple act of kindness, giving a blanket to two frightened girls, had bridged a vast gap of fear and misunderstanding. What could have ended in violence had instead become a lesson in trust, courage, and the quiet power of compassion. The frontier remained dangerous, but Samuel now knew that even in the harshest landscapes, humanity could shine brightly, guiding hearts toward understanding and respect. And so, as the sun climbed higher, warming the snow and casting long shadows across the plains, Samuel felt a deep sense of peace. The prairie was still wild, still unpredictable, but for the first time, he understood that courage was not measured by the strength of one's arms alone, but by the willingness to act with honor, even when fear threatened to dominate the heart. The morning of the warrior's arrival would remain in his memory forever, a vivid reminder of the fragile but enduring power of kindness. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, and the snow on the prairie sparkled under its warmth, but the cold of the night still lingered in Samuel's mind. After the arrival of the warriors and the tense moments of uncertainty, the ranch seemed transformed. What had once been a quiet, lonely homestead now felt alive with movement, voices, and shared purpose. Samuel watched the group carefully, noting how the warriors moved with confidence and respect, tending to the animals, repairing the fences, and even helping the girls with small chores. It was a scene that Samuel could hardly have imagined the day before, a moment when fear had been replaced by understanding. The older sister, who had been so cautious in the first days, now worked alongside Samuel, her hands steady and sure. She handed him tools, helped feed the cattle, and even showed the younger sister how to gather water safely from the creek. There was a quiet joy in her movements, a sense of pride that came from having survived such a terrifying ordeal and now seeing kindness rewarded. Samuel felt a deep warmth in his chest, a feeling that went beyond the comfort of fire or blankets. It was the satisfaction of seeing the simple power of good deeds ripple outward, touching lives in ways he could not have predicted. The elder warrior, whose eyes had been stern and questioning at first, now spoke with Samuel at length. He shared stories of the Apache people, their traditions, and the importance of protecting family and community. Samuel listened with respect, realizing that the cultural gap he had feared was smaller than he had imagined. Understanding, he learned, could exist even between people who lived in very different worlds, as long as honesty and courage guided the heart. The elder spoke of honor and trust, and Samuel realized that his single act of compassion, the giving of a blanket, had earned him a place in this world, at least in the eyes of these people. Food was shared throughout the morning and into the afternoon. Samuel had provided what little he could, but the warriors brought extra supplies, dried meats, blankets, and other necessities. The girls laughed quietly as they explored the gifts, their earlier fear replaced by curiosity and relief. Samuel marveled at the transformation in their expressions. The younger sister, who had spent so long clinging to her sister in fear, now moved freely, her laughter ringing across the snow-covered fields. The older sister's eyes shone with confidence, a reflection of her resilience and the reassurance that Samuel's actions had brought them. As the day progressed, Samuel walked with the elder warrior along the edge of the property, discussing practical matters. He had questions about the best ways to protect the ranch during the harsh winter, and the warrior answered patiently, showing him techniques that had been passed down for generations. Samuel listened closely, grateful not only for the practical advice, but also for the trust being built between them. For the first time, he felt that he was part of something larger than his solitary life, part of a network of understanding that spanned both settlers and native people in ways he had never considered before. The girls stayed nearby, helping where they could and occasionally sharing stories of their past lives. They spoke of the journeys they had taken, the dangers they had faced, and the moments of fear that had haunted them for days. Samuel listened quietly, offering comfort and encouragement when he could. He realized that their courage had been just as remarkable as his own. It took a great deal of strength to survive alone in the cold, facing dangers that most adults would have struggled to endure. Their presence reminded him that bravery came in many forms, and that sometimes the smallest actions, like wrapping oneself in a blanket, could have the largest impact. By late afternoon, the air had warmed slightly, and the snow began to glisten with the reflection of the sun. Samuel and the elder warrior stood together, watching the younger warriors practice riding and shooting arrows. It was a demonstration of skill, coordination, and discipline. Samuel's respect for their people grew with each passing moment. He realized that these warriors, who had appeared so intimidating at first, were not simply forces of fear. They were guardians, protectors, and teachers, shaped by a culture that valued honor, courage, and family above all else. The older sister came to Samuel, her expression serious. "They want to honor you," she said quietly. "You saved us, you protected us, they want to show respect." Samuel felt a mix of pride and humility. He had acted without expectation of reward, only guided by the desire to help those in need. Yet, to be acknowledged in this way by a community he had only just met filled him with a sense of belonging he had never known. He followed her to the gathering, unsure of what to expect but ready to accept whatever recognition they chose to offer. The warriors formed a circle, the older sister standing between Samuel and the elder warrior. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that this was a ceremony of honor. The elder warrior spoke, his voice clear and steady. He recounted the events of the previous night, describing Samuel's actions in detail. The courage it had taken to approach the girls, the selflessness of giving his only blanket, and the wisdom of protecting them despite fear of the unknown. Each word was deliberate, carrying weight and meaning, and Samuel felt the significance of the moment settle over him like a warm cloak. Then, one by one, the warriors stepped forward, offering gifts and tokens of respect. Blankets, food, and small tools were presented to Samuel, each item a symbol of gratitude and acknowledgement. The girls smiled proudly, and Samuel felt a deep sense of connection to them and to the warriors who had chosen understanding over anger. It was a powerful lesson. One act of kindness had created a ripple effect bridging gaps that might otherwise have seemed insurmountable. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow, Samuel felt a profound sense of peace. The fear that had gripped him in the early morning was gone, replaced by gratitude and understanding. He realized that the world, though harsh and unpredictable, held the capacity for goodness, courage, and trust. Even in the most unlikely circumstances, human hearts could connect across boundaries, cultures, and fears. The girls stayed close, their hands occasionally brushing against Samuel's as they moved about the ranch. Their laughter mingled with the voices of the warriors, creating a sense of harmony and unity that seemed almost magical against the stark backdrop of snow and cold. Samuel watched them with quiet pride, knowing that he had played a small role in shaping their survival and their sense of safety. The memory of the night they had arrived, shivering and afraid, now felt distant, replaced by a new reality filled with warmth, connection, and mutual respect. As night approached, the warriors began to prepare for departure. Samuel felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He had grown attached to them all, the girls, the elder warrior, and even the younger members of the group. Yet he understood that life on the frontier was always fleeting, that relationships were often temporary, and that survival required movement and adaptability. The elder warrior approached Samuel one last time, offering a firm handshake and a kind smile. "Remember," he said, "courage and kindness are never forgotten. You have honored us, and we honor you in return." Samuel nodded, his eyes moist with gratitude, realizing that he would carry this lesson for the rest of his life. When the warriors finally left, Samuel walked with the girls to the edge of the property, watching the riders disappear across the snow-covered plains. The air was quiet once more, yet Samuel did not feel the emptiness he had known before. The memory of the warriors, their respect, and the lessons they had shared lingered in his mind. The girls, now smiling and more confident than ever, looked up at him, their trust in him complete. Samuel felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not for himself, but for the power of a single act of compassion to change the course of lives. That night, as the fire burned low in the cabin, Samuel reflected on the events of the past days. He thought about the cold night when he had found the sisters, shivering and alone, and the fear that had gripped him when hundreds of warriors approached at dawn. He thought about the courage of the girls, their resilience, and the wisdom of the elder warrior who had taught him so much about respect and honor. And he thought about the simple human truth that had guided him all along. That kindness, even in the face of fear, could create ripples that touched hearts far beyond what one could see. Samuel knew that life on the frontier would continue to be harsh and unpredictable. Storms would come, animals would fall ill, and dangers would always lurk in the shadows. Yet, he now had a deeper understanding of the strength that lived within human connection. The trust he had earned, the bonds he had formed, and the lessons he had learned would guide him through any challenge. He realized that the world could be both harsh and beautiful, dangerous and full of hope, and that he had the power to choose compassion even in the most uncertain moments. As the fire dwindled and the girls fell asleep once more, Samuel stepped outside, feeling the crisp night air against his face. The stars shone bright above the snow-covered plains, a silent witness to the events of the past day. He thought about the journey of the sisters, their resilience, and the generosity that had brought them together. And he realized that the frontier, for all its challenges, had given him something rare and precious, a reminder that courage and kindness could shape not only the lives of others, but also the life of the one who dares to act with an open heart. In the quiet of the night, Samuel felt a sense of hope that went beyond the immediate. He knew that the memory of this day, the fear, the bravery, the laughter, and the respect, would remain with him forever. The girls, the warriors, and the simple act of giving a blanket would become a story he would tell in years to come, a testament to the power of compassion in a world that often seemed cold and unforgiving. The frontier would always be wild, unpredictable, and challenging, but Samuel now understood that the human heart had the power to bring warmth, trust, and understanding, even in the harshest of places. And so, under the quiet, star-filled sky, the rancher, once lonely and solitary, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had faced fear, embraced courage, and witnessed the extraordinary impact of a simple act of kindness. Life on the frontier would continue, as it always did, but Samuel now carried within him a lesson that no storm, no cold, and no distance could ever erase. That compassion, bravery, and understanding were stronger than fear, and that even the smallest gestures could change the course of lives forever.